Welcome to Vainglory Analytics video 14, Matches and Tiers. This video is going to look at 3 questions and answer 2 of them. First, 2 questions left over from the last video. Do matches really take 20 to 25 minutes? How many matches are actually being played on any given day? And 1 question new to this video. How are players distributed among the skill tiers? I said I'd answer 2 of these questions, and here's why. I've been talking to Super Evil Megacorp about whether I'm allowed to distribute the data archives and code I'm using to answer these questions. One thing they'd like me to avoid doing is sharing information about how many concurrent users there are in Vainglory. So while I could answer this question, I'm going to respect the wishes of the very nice folks at Super Evil Megacorp and stick to analyses that don't cause any problems for the company. And this brings us back to an unanswered question from the last video. As you may recall, there are a lot of matches out there, and at first we don't know how many. But we want a sample of them so that we can do analysis to answer questions like these. It's important that the sample be random, or our answers are going to be messed up. Let's talk about why that is. Let's imagine it's the 80s, and you're running a newspaper business. It would have to be the 80s if you were. You want to know if people like the opinion pieces in your paper, so you call in your staff. You can tell it's the 80s because one of them is smoking. And you have them do a survey of the readers. Later, they come back in with the results. People love your editorials. Keep it up. Being a smart manager, you ask, how did you do the survey? They say, we gave the paper boys a bonus to interview the customers. Not quite enough info. You dig deeper. How did the paper boys do the survey? They say, they canvassed their neighborhoods when they got off school for the day. Final question. What was the response rate on the survey? They say, an excellent response rate. 40% of customers answered the questionnaire. But who were those customers who answered? Well, they're the people who were home when the paper boys stopped by. Who could that be? Who's home when kids get off school? Stay-at-home moms, school teachers, people on the night shift. Is that the customer base? No way. It's a skewed subset of the customer base. All you know from that survey is that the stay-at-home moms and the people who work the night shift like the editorials in the paper. Maybe all the doctors, nurses, business people, store clerks, and plumbers feel completely differently. You don't know, because you didn't survey any of them. The data gathering was not random. It very systematically excluded anyone who wasn't home at 3 p.m. Or, let's say it's the present day, and you're a politician. You want to know if people like your recent push for greater internet privacy. So you have your aides survey your constituents. They get back to you later with the results. They say, people don't really care. Being smart, you ask, how'd you do the survey? They say, social media survey with 2,000 responses. Maybe the people who care about their privacy on the internet don't give their opinions very often on social media. So of course the people who responded didn't really care much about internet privacy. All the people who do care didn't want to respond. The data gathering method was not random. It was heavily biased towards people who are happy to share their opinion over the internet. Or let's say I'm going to fetch some matches from the Vainglory API. I want 5,000. Here's one way I could do it. Ask for all the matches from April 5th to 11th, 2018, and just take the first 5,000. But that would restrict us to just a few days. What if those few days were somehow unusual, like they were weekdays and not weekends, and that wouldn't be representative of the weekend players? So we want some way to sprinkle our sample randomly through the whole set. So we could chop up the date range into all 168 hours in that week, and take the first 30 matches from each hour, and that would give us just over 5,000 matches. Then they'd be nicely spread throughout the week, but that isn't random either. To see how, realize that some times of day are more popular to play than others. For instance, midnight is probably somewhat popular, but 4 a.m. less so. Noon is not so popular because most people are at work or school, but prime time of the evening, pretty popular. So if we sample evenly from all times of the day, we're taking a high percentage of the unpopular times, but a low percentage of the popular times. We're biasing our sample towards matches played at unpopular times. Who are those folks playing at unpopular times? I don't know. People homesick from work or school? Insomniacs? People who work nights? I don't know. But I know they're probably not representative of the whole player base. So we need a random sample. To get one, we need to know how many matches are in the whole time frame so we can randomly choose 5,000 from that number. Here's how we get that total number. Remember that game that all kids play at some point? Guess the number in my head. The other person guesses, and then you say higher or lower, and then the other person guesses again. We're going to play that game. Let's start with a guess of 1,000. We ask the API to give us the 1,000th match. If it gives us a match, then we know there are at least 1,000. If it says it doesn't have a 1,000th match to give us, then we know there are fewer than 1,000. So the API has answered higher or lower, and we can guess again. Let's say it turned out there was a 1,000th match, so we guess again. We guess 2,000. And if it gives us a match, we know there's at least 2,000. If not, we know there's between 1,001 and 1,999 matches. We just keep guessing and narrowing it down. Of course, you don't do something like that manually. That would be really tedious. You teach a computer to do it. When the computer finishes narrowing things down with repeated guessing, it turned out that there were 17,796 ranked 5v5 matches from April 5th to 11th, 2018. Now we can do a random sample of them. We have our computer pick 5,000 random numbers between 1 and 17,796, each number equally likely to be chosen. That's a random sample. Then we fetch from the API just those matches. That is, we ask the API for match 15, then match 19, then match 21, then 40 and 47, and so on through all of the 5,000 randomly chosen numbers in our sample. That is a random sample. So I did that. And I did it again for 3v3 ranked matches, like I said in the last video. And now we can use that to answer some fun questions. Question 1. Do matches really take 20 to 25 minutes? The answer? Sort of. Let's start with 3v3 ranked. The game says those matches take about 20 minutes. That turns out to be correct. Here's the distribution of all match times for my 3v3 archive. The horizontal axis is how long the match took, and the height of a bar is how many matches took that long. We can do some stats on this and get a 99% confidence interval for the average 3v3 ranked match duration. It's between 20 minutes 20 seconds and 20 minutes 42 seconds. Just a few seconds longer than the game advertises. Great! But what about 5v5? Here's where I was a little surprised. Here's the same data, but 5v5 ranked matches. Minutes in the match along the bottom, height of bars, again, how many matches. So we do some stats again, get a 99% confidence interval for average match duration, 21 minutes 52 seconds to 22 minutes 18 seconds. Not just 3 minutes shorter than advertised, but really similar to 3v3 ranked times. In fact, the difference is just over a minute and a half. So if you're thinking 5v5 is a larger time commitment, or if you're thinking 3v3 saves you some time over 5v5, maybe think again. You can get that more strategic depth in 5v5 without really investing much more time. The average durations tend to be only about 90 seconds different. Thinking beyond just an average, we can ask how long the central 99% of match durations are. This throws away everything but the most unusual length matches. For 3v3, 99% of ranked matches take between 12 minutes 20 seconds and 28 minutes 42 seconds, while 99% of 5v5 ranked matches take between 12 minutes 29 seconds and 31 minutes 41 seconds. There's almost no difference at all between the shortest matches in each game mode, but on the long end, the difference is just under 3 minutes. This makes sense with the fact that the average, somewhere in the middle, was different by about a minute and a half. So if your matches go long, then you might notice the difference between 3v3 and 5v5 durations. But if not, you might not notice much of a difference at all. That kind of surprised me. Alright, so what about the other question I wanted to answer? Question 3. Remember, we're skipping question 2. How are players distributed among the skill tiers? Now, here we had some trouble. We took a random sample of matches, not a random sample of players. See, in any sample of matches, the players who play all the time are more likely to get sampled. And as we saw in a previous video, how much you play is correlated with your skill tier. So if we just look at all the players in our match archive, we'll find things skewed toward the high tiers. But would it be skewed a lot or a little? Well, we just don't know unless we somehow manage to undo that bias in our sampling. It turns out there's a way you can. But this video has already gone on long enough, so I'll describe the method really briefly. It goes like this. Get a list of players in the sample, sorted by tier. For each tier, pick a random collection of the players, maybe 50, and then ask the API how many matches each of those players played during the time frame from which the sample was taken. Use that information to compute the probability that the player's name would have shown up in a random sample like the one I took. Now, average all those probabilities across the 50 players from one tier. The reciprocal of that probability is a good multiplier to use to rescale the size of the player base in that tier. If you think about it, players that are less likely to show up in the sample are like really precious data because they represent lots of other people like them that didn't get in the sample because they don't play that often. So small probabilities of getting sampled should make us count that data more, since the ones we did sample are representative of a big group we didn't happen to sample. And the opposite is true for players that play all the time. Our sample probably contains matches from most of the people who play all the time, so we don't really need to inflate those numbers at all to compensate for anybody who's missing, because not many people are missing. It's important to be careful like this with a biased sample because you don't know how big the effect of the non-random sampling procedure was. Maybe it doesn't matter, or maybe it matters a lot. Let's find out. Here's what the distribution of players over tiers looks like in the 3v3 ranked data with no adjustments for sampling bias. Now, you notice one weird thing right away. Why the heck are there no low-tier players? The answer is that in order to do ranked play at all, you have to earn at least 8 heroes and get to level 10. So by the time you enter ranked queue, most people are able to get past the stink tiers pretty quickly. I suspect that if I had made an archive of 3v3 casual matches, blitzes, battle royales, etc., we'd find plenty of people in these tiers who are still working their way up to ranked play, and this graph would balloon up at the bottom. So what happens when we adjust this graph for the sampling bias, like I described? Well, not much, actually. It turns out in this sample, the matches were distributed over the tiers a lot like how the players are distributed over the tiers. But notice that the tiny adjustments that happened were in the directions we predicted. High tiers are slightly less prevalent than the matches distribution indicates, and low tiers are slightly more prevalent. One other thing that we can get from this chart is that in 3v3 ranked play, only about 8% of the players are in the top 2 tiers. That's way less than 8% of the overall player base, because of course there's all the players that haven't yet earned the right to play in ranked play. What about 5v5? One interesting change is that in 3v3 the big peak was in tier 4, but in 5v5 it's in tier 3. I honestly have no idea why. Other than that, it's a pretty similar distribution before we adjust for sampling bias. But when we do, we see more significant adjustments. Tiers 1 to 3 end up getting increases, while each tier above 3 ends up at 10% or less of the players. Just to reiterate, this is not the entire player base. The blue line is just the people who played 5v5 ranked matches in my sample, and the orange line shows an adjustment based on play frequency to more accurately estimate the portion of the player base who's choosing to play 5v5 ranked. I remember listening recently to the Conversing in Vain podcast, and those guys were wondering what percentage of the players are in each tier. So this one's for you, guys. Thanks for making your podcast, and feel free to send over other number crunchy questions. Actually, on second thought, I'm not hurting for ideas at the moment. I've already got a ton of analyses I've already done, but haven't had time to convert into a video. Like these. How often do double, triple, or quadra, or pentakills happen? If one player dominates a game, how certain are you that it's a smurf? Where do early game engages happen on Sovereign's Rise? Is the Sovereign's Rise map symmetrical enough to ensure 50% win rate on each side? What are the hero win, pick, and ban rates in 5v5 by skill tier? I've actually already done all of these analyses using my match data, but believe it or not, it takes way longer to make a video than to do the data analytics in the first place. Wow, video editing takes forever. Even just writing the script, my gosh. Anyway, enough of my whining. Have a great weekend, and I will see you in the next video.